How's it going, everyone? It's Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and in this video, we're going to talk about Concord, the new 5v5 hero shooter from developer Firewalk Studios. Now, if you have been following this game, or just remember when that reveal trailer came out, you'll know that it was not what we would call positively received. In fact, it was absolutely flamed into the ground. Testing periods for this game were announced for July 2024, and that is a month from its full release in August. I think, like a lot of people, I was generally skeptical when a testing period is so close to release because there's just not enough time to apply player feedback. But regardless, the beta is here, and Sony decided to open up this testing period to all PlayStation Plus subscribers, as this was originally limited to those that have pre-ordered the game. So let's talk about it. Now, while Concord has been flamed for its reveal trailer, I can say that after spending a number of hours with the beta, that I think the game is surprisingly solid, and that might be largely due to the fact that expectations before this were barely above ground, but I had a lot of fun playing with this game. But the caveat is that unlike the trailer that showed a lot of fast-paced action, the game is actually slower than expected. This is not a game you really want to dive in solo. Concord emphasizes team play, and a well-rounded, coordinated team is going to have far greater success than those that just go in there acting like a lone wolf. I was really impressed by the visual presentation. The character models here are greatly detailed. I think the visuals overall are stunning. The introductions before each match reminded me of Destiny or Guardians of the Galaxy, and some of the details that you find in the maps are pretty cool as well. The characters, or free gunners as they're known in the game, are all unique and handled differently from one another. Some characters are fast and mobile, while others are slow, tanky, and an absolute force when they're in a 1v1. There was not a single character out of the roster of 16 that felt redundant, and that to me was a really positive sign. Everyone served a different purpose, and they all felt really good to control. Every free gunner in the game has their own kit. Some will have multiple traversal abilities. You'll have a character like Tio who can double jump and dodge. You'll also have characters that can't do any of that, primarily because they're tanks, and it would be absolutely terrifying to see one of them charging at you or double jumping above you to get around you. That would absolutely blow my mind. It would also frustrate the hell out of me and potentially ruin the balance. All characters have a passive, which can affect the entire crew, which really opens things up for team synergy. Characters will also have two abilities that are unique to them, and they also have combat traits, and these can do a couple of things. I've seen some where it just gives you more ammo, and others that will help buff specific abilities or help you get cooldowns quicker, which I think is really helpful when you're in combat. Some characters will have a primary and a secondary weapon, while others will only have a primary, but that's okay because those characters that only have abilities and no secondary weapon are more than likely going to have very fast cooldowns, or their abilities do high damage. Some characters have abilities that require them to get up close and personal to do critical damage, and those are probably my favorite to play. As training was not available during the beta, which was a pretty curious decision, you really just had to dive in, select a free gunner, and then go from there. Now, you do have the option while selecting a character to review their abilities, and I recommend you do so that you weren't scrambling during a fight. It is recommended that you utilize everything at your disposal when engaging in firefights. There are free gunners in which leaving certain abilities, like seeds, on the field can lead to higher damage output for yourself. There's also characters in which you'll shoot gel on the ground and then you can ignite them, pretty much walling enemies off and doing damage at the same time. The most interesting thing that I saw was that you had abilities that can buff your team and also make the other team vulnerable. And when that's combined with another squad's mate's abilities, you can make short work of some enemies. And I think that leads me into saying that there's a real flow to this game when a team is coordinated. It's not really noticeable when you engage in any of the other modes that have respawn available, like Takedown or Trophy Hunt, but when you play Rivalry, which has no respawns and requires you to select different free gunners when you win, then you'll notice that the more you coordinate as a team, the more effective you are. I think this is where Concord really stands out because it requires the player to get comfortable with multiple characters. You actually have the option to create a crew, and this is a feature that is available to you after level 6, which is essentially a stable of your favorite characters. And at first I wasn't too sure that this feature was needed with any modes that had respawn, but once I started to play the competitive rivalry modes it was evident that I was far more effective with characters I was comfortable with. And I was also cool if like someone picked a character that I wanted to queue because I had other characters I knew how to play available. I think one of the things that really stood out to me and really frustrated me was that players would just drop out and they would not be substituted. And I think that one of the ways to mitigate this is to add training. I know that the next beta period is going to be open, and I think that during this time frame, Firewalk Studios should really consider putting training in so that we are able to lab and therefore we can see less players dropping out. Also, I think that their one priority right now is to ensure that when players do drop out, that you substitute them as soon as possible. This game requires 5 players. It really does, because sometimes you'll get lucky on a 4v5. Brad and I did. We had a couple times where we were able to kind of just silo teams that were super aggressive, get a bunch of kills, and then end up like winning at the end with a nice little clutch. But that was against teams that lacked experience. When we started to get into rivalry matches, we had noticed that the moment we were down 1 or 2 players, it was over. We were getting overtaken quickly, and I think that one of the priorities for Firewalk on that next beta should be substituting players so that we aren't getting overwhelmed or frustrated and people are just leaving and rage quitting this game. Like most games as a service, Concord has a number of ways for players to gain experience, and the job board found here is filled with daily, weekly, and seasonal requests that are going to be familiar to anyone who has played a competitive multiplayer game. Now, some of the rewards, in my opinion, are kind of lackluster. New outfits, accessories, poses, and so on, but there is something unique that Concord has done that I think should be implemented in other hero shooters. There are special bounties that you can complete that will lead you to unlock unique variants of characters. These unique variants have different combat traits from their base counterparts, and this can make the character more combat effective. I'm hoping that as more variants are introduced and unlocked, that the changes affect not only their combat traits but their abilities as well. This is a feature that I think can be adopted by every hero shooter out there in the future, as instead of introducing new characters who will eventually become redundant, you introduce variants that make slight alterations to existing characters to make them feel fresh. I think that would be a lot of fun, but let me know what you think in the comments. I feel like I've talked about Concord pretty positively up until this point in the video, and I do want to talk about some of the downsides, but the first thing I just want to bring up very briefly, and this is why I think that it's going to be kind of hard for Concord to kind of catch on, is that it's a game that's meant to be played as a team. It's meant to be played with friends. This is not a competitive shooter meant for anyone who wants to play solo. I think that if you were trying to dive into this, you'll notice very quickly that team synergy at times is required. It is the preferred method. While I think every free gunner is fun to play, I also think there are going to be characters that we're rarely going to see due to their playstyle. I think that happens with every hero shooter. Some characters in this game are very niche and will more than likely need a buff to their damage or adjustments to their abilities to entice other players to play. I like the fact that there are 16 characters, everyone's unique, everyone fills a role, but some characters are going to be easier to play than others, and that's not immediately identified when you pick up this game. Some other things that I wasn't too big on, for example, the traversal mechanics. So listen, I do not mind every character having a different traversal ability. Dodging, floating, whatever. But when you pull the character out of first person and into third person, it gets awkward. And while I think the animations are cool, this is a very pretty game. It's not something I want to see in the middle of a firefight. Some other complaints that I saw that I want to talk about. I saw some people talking about character speed. A lot of people are talking about how slow this game is at times, and while I do feel like there are characters that are stuck in the mud in comparison to others, I also feel like the differences in health, which do stand out and you do get to see, will balance all that out, because once again, it's about team composition, and there are some characters that are going to be faster than others, but they're also going to have very low health pools. There's also some awkwardness when playing respawn modes and constantly being sent back to the free gunner select screen. And this is just like a personal complaint of mine. I understand that there is an incentive for the player to switch if the team composition isn't working, but the respawn modes are essentially team deathmatch, and I think that constantly going back into this screen interrupts the flow. I think it's completely fine in competitive modes in which no respawn exists. You are queuing for your team, and each round is unique, but I feel like we don't need to go back to the character select screen every time we die in modes we respawn. That's just me though. Also, and this is just a minor thing, I would like to see objectives change positions during games. I assume that this is just a flaw of the beta, but it became quickly repetitive when everyone was going to fight for the same position over and over and over again. While the different characters did add some layer of strategy to this, the objective position remaining the same usually resulted in the same strategy of whomever had the high ground would have advantage on the team below them, so you would get into matches, and if someone was above you and just shooting down or hitting you with different abilities, blinding you, whatever it was, you were screwed. I think one of the other things I want to see added, and I didn't see an option for, was introductory training. I think this should be a part of the main game, and this can be optional for those of us who have played the beta, but I think for new players, it would be really helpful for anyone who is looking to dive into this game. Characters found here are unique and have a ton of variants. There's a lot to learn about Concord, and I feel like scrolling through the different menus isn't the best way to get players acclimated to the different systems found here. I know that introductory training is found in a lot of competitive multiplayer games, so its absence here is really noticeable considering all the things you have to remember when you're playing this game. The last thing I want to talk about, and I don't think it's as serious as people were making out to be, I just feel like this is just a complaint of every multiplayer shooter out there, is the time to kill. So my opinion on it is that every character has different kits and different passives, and it's really on you to utilize all of their abilities to effectively down enemies. I saw complaints about the TTK, and some of it didn't make any sense because some characters were constructed as glass cannons. For example, Haymar and Roka, they're very high damaging characters, they're very mobile, but they can be melted relatively quickly. So maybe you can fine tune the TTK, but I wouldn't say it's a major downside thus far. I just think that it's just always going to be a point of contention, especially in a game where there's effectively different heroes. But for the most part, you're meant to take on enemies as a team, utilizing all of your different abilities to debuff, make enemies vulnerable, whatever. And I think that will help you in regard to just kind of accepting that the time to kill is a little longer, because some enemies, have high health pools, but some, they can't take too many headshots, right? Just there's a balance there. And I was just kind of confused when I saw that because I feel like they weren't really playing the game as it was intended. And that was just one of the things that I had noticed, but I just wanted to bring it up. I just want to know how people feel about the time to kill because I felt like it was okay for the most part. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by Concord and am looking forward to seeing what changes get implemented between now and release. While I enjoyed my time with the game, my buddy Brad did mention to me after we had played a couple matches that this was a game he couldn't see himself playing solo as it was far more enjoyable with friends, and on that, I agree. I think what's here is very polished, and outside of minor complaints that will more than likely be updated or tuned by release, there's nothing really overly negative I can say about this game. Now, whether or not it's going to sell well is going to depend on Sony. For me personally, I think that this should be a PlayStation Plus game moving forward. It's not that I don't think $40 is a solid price point for this type of title, but I believe the negative feedback that Concord has received since its reveal has allowed players to remain skeptical, even if the product is far better than what's been spoken about. If it's on PS Plus, I believe that players will give this game a try, and I believe that due to its polished nature, it will be better received than, let's say, Destruction All-Stars, which was a dud upon release, and that was primarily due to its gameplay. What I'm saying is that for Concord to have a chance to be a staple PlayStation IP, to be one of its live service titles that PlayStation continuously goes back to, Sony needs to set this game up for success. I think that these testing periods will definitely shed a brighter light on Concord moving forward, but the skepticism is going to remain until its final release because the gaming community judged this game before they played it, which, as we've seen with other games, will more than likely affect its future prospects. But if you put it on PlayStation Plus and say, hey, it's free for this month, I think you may see a number of players kind of turn themselves to it, play it, and you'll probably have a higher attach rate. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are. Leave a comment and let me know how you feel about your time with Concord during its beta period, because that is going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I am Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.